Thank you to Sakuraco and TokyoTreat for sponsoring today's video. Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So throughout the years, my chibi style has changed quite a bit, and I've always been struggling to find a chibi style that I kind of want to stick with or one that I like and enjoy. So today I thought it'd be kind of fun to show you guys what I've kind of landed on in terms of the chibi style. So more recently, I've been sketching a lot of the chibis on Procreate with this kind of proportioning or kind of like heads tall in terms of how I want the head to body ratio to be. So I have done a lot of sketches for Genshin ones recently because I'm trying to catch up on Sumeru and Fontaine characters. So you can see here that Sino and Tinari kind of follow this kind of proportioning alongside with Alhaitham and Kave. So I am kind of sticking with this smaller, more squat little proportioning for all my chibis. So even though I have decided that I will stick with the kind of two heads tall chibis, I thought it'd be kind of fun to play around with the proportionings just a little bit more. So I went ahead and took my original two-headed template right here, which is represented by two circles stacked on each other, kind of like a snowman. So the ones that I kind of want to experiment with is from left to right. We have a 3 head tall, a 2.5 head tall, and a 2 head tall. So technically, my chibis right now are going to be 2 heads tall, meaning that the head to the rest of the body ratio is basically 1 to 1. And the proportioning is kind of represented and scaled off of the head size, which is why I'm going to try my best to keep the head size proportionate to the circle that I have for my current template. Which means that I'm going to keep basically the torso and the legs and feet all within the little last circle at the very bottom, so you can kind of keep that 1 to 1 ratio. Now, technically, even if your chibi is going to be 2 heads tall, like this one that I'm currently working on, you could play around with the proportionings of the rest of the body. You could have a really short torso and really long legs. You could have thinner legs, kind of chunkier legs. You could have really like stubby, nubby looking legs or like arms or limbs, however you want, or like gigantic hands, gigantic feet. You kind of can play around with it, but for the most part, I kind of like the cuteness of having the head be quite big and large and kind of more on the rounder side. And for the most part, it's just kind of for the idea of as a sticker or as a design that's going to be printed out on a smaller scale, it's just going to be a little bit easier for me to read alongside with faster for me to draw. So it's a kind of a good balance. And once we get to the coloring and line art portion, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But now that we kind of have the little base for my 2 headed chibi, I'm going to take the head and plop it onto the other templates so that I can just draw the rest of the body onto them. And we can kind of see the difference between the different proportionings depending on how tall your chibi is going to be. But I'm going to keep the proportions in terms of like the torso and the legs kind of like up to myself as I would usually draw them. So usually I would draw my chibis more in the 2.5 head tall category. I'll put some on the screen for you to reference as my previous Genshin alongside with like previous fan art, so let's say 17, FGO, Fire Emblem, all of that, tend to fall under the 2.5 head tall chibis. So when I draw out the body here, I do almost a 1 to 1 in terms of keeping the torso and the legs fairly similar in length. But realistically, I tend to draw the legs a little bit longer and make the torso just very small compared to the rest of the body. So hopefully with the examples on the screen, you'll kind of see a little bit better of how I proportion these kind of chibis before. But for the most part, I definitely did like the 2.5 head tall chibi proportioning just because I at least like for the most part drew a lot of details on the characters, and like Genshin characters or anything within like Hoyoverse, even like FGO, Fire Emblem tend to have a lot more detail. So I feel like I was able to fit more onto that chibi size versus let's say the 2 head tall chibi on the very right. So the one that I'm doing right now is going to be the 3 head tall chibi, and you can kind of see it's getting a little lanky. I personally don't mind the chibis looking like this, and I don't think there should be like a specific proportion rule other than I guess like chibi tends to mean like Well, I guess like I believe in the Japanese, besides it being more like small, at least like when I was on the DeviantArt days, a lot of people called chibi styles like SD version, which I believe meant super deformed in Japanese. Like that's how they referred to chibis at the time. So as long as they're, I guess like they're not in their original form for the most part, I guess you could consider a lot of different things to be a chibi form of your original design. So it's kind of like up to you, and you can definitely play around a lot with the proportioning and all that. So as I'm labeling these, later on I will be showing you guys a little bit more of an overview of the actual comparison of all three of them side by side, so you can kind of see the difference in the proportioning and kind of how I separated them. I will be fixing the 2.5 head tall's legs to be a little bit longer. Also, a one-headed chibi does not really make sense because it probably won't have a body, because we are using the proportions depending on the head size. Quick comparison from like my old style with the 2.5 head tall chibi and my current style, which I want to use for like future designs, with the two-headed chibi. So let's skip over to Clip Studio Paint for the line art. So before moving to Clip Studio Paint for the line art, let's take a break with our sponsor TokyoTreat and Sakuraco. If you're looking to try out new snacks from Japan, then you're in luck. Sakuraco and TokyoTreat have these lovely snack boxes where you can experience Japan from the comfort of your own home. TokyoTreat is a monthly pop Japanese snack subscription box with 20 of the latest exclusive, limited edition, and seasonal flavored Japanese snacks that are only available in Japan for a limited time. This includes a full-size drink, an exclusive ramen, and a variety of different kinds of snacks. Looks like we have a very colorful set of snacks for the summer in both savory and sweet flavors. While Sakuraco is an authentic Japanese snack subscription box, Sakuraco supports local Japanese snack makers, and each of the box comes with 20 traditional, authentic, and artisan Japanese snacks, but also includes Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware. For July's box, the Neko Tenengui, which is a Japanese towel, is the tableware for this month, adorning an adorable, colorful theme design with these little cats on it. This month's box actually has a lot of snacks that I'm super curious about, as I've never seen a lot of them before, and with the theme of this month's box, I'm super excited to try them out. Now, speaking of themes, both boxes come with a 24-page cultural guide, and I love that it includes information regarding ingredients, allergens of each of the snacks, but also informs you of a little bit of tidbits of information revolving around culture and tradition, alongside with the information about snack makers. Each month does have a different theme, meaning that you get to try out a whole new selection of new treats and snacks every month. For example, Tokyo Treat's box theme for the month of July is Okinawa Snack and Oasis, while Sakuraco's theme is the Festival of Tohoku, which is a festival taking place in the northeastern part of Japan. So let's check out this month's tea from Sakuraco. I did take a look at it earlier, and I'm kind of excited because I love matcha tea, but ever since like receiving these boxes from Sakuraco, I've learned that I also love the taste and aroma of roasted rice, which luckily for me, they are both present in the Iemon Matcha Genmaicha, which is easy to make and refreshing to drink. One of my favorites from the Tokyo Treat box, besides usually the Kit Kats, was definitely the Ariel sour cream and onion chips. Not only am I a big fan of this flavor, but the kind of corn chip flavor reminds me of Bugles when they were available in Canada. These are super crispy and crunchy. And as for Sakuraco, I was definitely interested in trying this kind of mysterious snack in this box, which happened to be a ginger senbei. I've never had this before, and it was very gingery, which I know my mom would actually really enjoy this one a lot. I could never really go wrong with sweet potatoes either, so these little sweet potato amanato were perfect. They're super tasty and super sweet potato forward, if I could say. So if you would like to get a box for yourself or want to give these as a lovely gift to families or friends this month, then check out the links in the description to get your boxes today. Thank you again to Sakuraco and Tokyo Treat for sponsoring today's video. Now, moving back to Sunday line art. I think I forgot to mention who I'm drawing. I'm drawing Sunday from Honkai Star Rail, by the way. But before we get onto the line art, let's go ahead and bring up Sunday's legs a little bit higher, as that's kind of like the preferred proportions that I like to do for my 2.5 head tall chibis. I tend to give them a little bit more of a shorter, more stout kind of torso for the most part, similar to how I have this one of Kaya, which is about 2.5 heads tall. So I'm measuring it out right here, and he definitely is not quite 3 heads tall. He's definitely closer to 2.5 head tall. So lowering the opacity of my sketch, I'm also dropping a background color so it's a little bit easier instead of the transparent Clip Studio Paint background. And we can go ahead and proceed with the line art. So kind of similar how I did this sketch, I will be starting with the 2 head tall chibi. I'm using the Milli pen. I'll make sure to leave it in the description on which tools that I used for Clip Studio Paint alongside with the Procreate brushes if you're interested. So for line art, I do have a very high stabilization. I think this is anywhere from like 40 to, I don't even know, 80 maybe. I may even had it set to 100. Anything that allows me to have quite a bit of control and have a more, I don't know, easier time working with the line art is probably most ideal. So in terms of the line art, I am choosing a brush that has very, very little line width variation. I'm not too sure if the Milli pen has any, but I'm making sure that my lines start and stop very deliberately as well, because I kind of want the lines to be a little bit more bold, a little chunkier, but also still very simple. So I'm trying my best to avoid tangents if I can. I do sometimes get a little bit tired and just like forget about wanting to care about tangents, so there's probably plenty visible here, but it's okay. For the most part, what I'm aiming for these little chibis, because I mentioned that they will be printed out on a fairly small scale. If I didn't mention, they will be stickers, so I want them to be legible and very easily read at a smaller scale. So the line art and coloring is just going to be as important to the kind of like design and the readability of everything. So for the line art, I want it to be bold and simple. And for the details, I don't want to go too crazy, especially because at this kind of smaller, stout stature of the chibis, there's not really a point for me to add too many details. And that's kind of something I wanted to avoid. And partially the reason why I wanted to shrink down the chibis like this is to prevent me from having to do too many details. So for the most part, I wanted to also color in Sunday's face or his head before we paste it onto the other sketches, just because I don't want to recolor everything for every other Sunday because all of them will be kind of like inconsistent looking. So let's go ahead and work smarter, not harder, so we can actually get these to look consistent. So coloring wise, similar to line art, I am going to be working a little bit more bold alongside with keeping things clean and a little bit more simple. I don't think this one of Sunday is going to be the best example for the clothing, just because his clothing is white and he does have some details that I feel like I could have omitted and it still reads as Sunday. So for the most part, I am doing all cell shading for everything. I don't think I really do any... Oh no, okay, so yeah, cell shading pretty much for everything except for if there is a need for a gradient. You'll see that I'll do that for his sleeves at some point and a little bit for his feathers on his head. I will also do a little bit of a gradient just because it is present in his design, but cell shading is a little bit easier for me to read at a smaller scale because there's not really a point on like full rendering and shading more realistically. I guess that's kind of like a loose term in this case, but for me, cell shading, because it's like bold and clean and sharp, it's just very easy like at a glance to see what is what. I also try to make sure that things just don't get muddled together too much, so cell shading is just a little bit more fitting that way too. But I think for the most part, I am set on these kind of more squat, little shorter chibis because I mentioned they are going to be a little bit easier for me to draw out, and I've sketched like a whole bunch of them. For the most part, the time consuming part will be the sketching and the line art. Coloring's not too bad. Even right here, as I'm doing the coloring, I found a way that's a little bit more consistent. So I'm coloring some of the lighter areas that are not in shadow with the shadow color for the line art, just to give it a slightly softer look. But for the most part, the outside edges alongside like with my expanding of the pixels right here, I'm giving it a darker black border around everything. So I'm making sure that when I do color in the lines for my line art, I am not changing the outside lines. So this is kind of what he looks like. I've already pasted the heads onto the other little bases, and we'll draw the rest of the body and the clothing a little bit after. I believe at some point I will notice that Sunday does wear gloves and he does not have like bare hands, so I will be changing those back to white at some point. For some smaller details, I will just do it in color. I do think if I do too many things with line art, it just gets very cluttered and doesn't read very well. And because a lot of the lines will be black, I don't want everything to kind of meld into one gigantic black blob in the very end. So if I really want to add detail, I will add it in just via a color lines instead of just like adding line art, having to color that in. So it doesn't get too busy. But I think that's it for the 2 head tall chibi. So let's go ahead and move on to our other two. And for some reason, the 3 head tall chibi kind of reminds me of something, and I can't put my finger on it. I'm pretty sure it's because of Sunday's face with the proportioning and just like his demeanor. It's slightly off-putting. I don't know if it's like the buff guy with this very small like head. I don't know if it's a bear or it's a cat, but it kind of has that similar vibe where it's slightly threatening, if anything. So yeah, if anyone knows what I'm talking about, please let me know, because I cannot put my finger on it what it reminds me of. But yeah, I do think he looks a little funny, but we'll get to that a little bit later when we do like the final comparison. I am going to be speeding through the entirety of the line art. I still wanted to include all the line art because there are some parts where I decided to omit detail on the 2.5 head tall chibi versus like leaving it in for the 3 head tall chibi, and like kind of vice versa, because when I'm actually working in this kind of like taller, longer proportions for my chibis, I do use a thinner line art that I can have a lot more variation, which kind of contributes to like the messiness or the clutteredness of some of like my chibis looks alongside with the coloring. So things might look a little bit hard to read or a little muddled, but kind of keeping the same line art width consistent with all three kind of gives me a good idea of how I want things to read for the most part. So the 2.5 head tall and the 3 head tall chibi, I don't think have too many differences other than one just literally got longer. I don't think I added too much more detail to one or the other. They're fairly consistent, but the chibi that is 2 heads tall definitely has less details and things that I was like okay with omitting for the most part. But I think I do have like what people might call like the too much gene, where I have the inclination of just wanting to add more if I can. So I'm trying my best to learn how to pull back, and hopefully with these chibis that are a little bit more smaller, I can, less is more rather than having to put too much detail into everything and it becomes way too messy. So now with the line art done with the 2 last GBs here, I am going ahead and using that little fill lasso tool and putting in a gray base for the body. And then after that, I will make a new folder and a layer and clip that to this kind of dark gray base color. That way I can kind of keep all of my colors contained with the within the dark gray, and it just makes things a lot easier so I don't have to worry about erasing outside of my line art, and everything is just kind of like neatly contained and it's just easier to manage in my opinion. So kind of similar steps for everything else. I put all the base colors for Sunday. Oh, I guess that's like another thing I didn't really mention. For the smaller chibis, I did end up giving them what I would consider like ball hands, similar to like Animal Crossing hands or like Mii's, where they have just like circles. Sometimes they have lines and sometimes they don't. But at a smaller scale, I definitely think it's a little harder for me to have to put in all of the fingers where it's like more legible. I could give them like more mitten hands if I wanted to, but for the most part, I think ball hands just kind of work the best. These kind of like fingers for the other two chibis, even with this thicker line art, did make it a little bit awkward to put such thin areas, if that makes sense, for like the fingers and any extremities. And I don't think it really adds too much to the chibi design, but for like the ball hands, I do think they read a little bit more cuter, if anything, just a little bit more chunkier. And like I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, if you are like playing around with proportionings with chibi uh designs, I guess, you can definitely give them like smaller or bigger hands, more simplified or more detailed hands. I've seen like the whole thing where people do the two and a half, not two and a half, two head tall chibis and make them super detailed and they turn out super wonderful. But for me, I know myself and I don't want to be put in the kind of position of wanting to add too much detail. So kind of thicker liner, smaller proportionings is just going to work a lot better for me. So the last thing I did for the last two chibis was also add the black outline to the outside. And I think that's it for our little comparison. So other than showing you guys the kind of overview at the very end, I am going to need to put some kind of line at the very bottom so that they can stand on the same plane. I did make the three head tall chibi a little bit different, but for the most part, this is kind of our staircasing and proportioning for each of the different, I guess, like head talls that you are for your chibis. And here's the little overview. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!